Hi folks, so today we'll be doing a short, well, we'll see if it's short, learn to play video for the Game of Thrones, the card game, 2nd edition. This is organized by the Friendly Open Discord group, and joining me today is one of the organizers of that tournament series, Hannes. Hello, Hannes.
Hello, Miha. Thanks for inviting me. I'm excited about doing this tutorial.
Yeah, and as you can see, we are on a website called ThronesDB, which is the main deck builder for this card game. And first of all, don't worry about it. This is not a deck building video, so if you are new to the game, you can skip that part. You can find decks that are already built here, as you can see, sorted by factions here on the front screen, and you can spot the good decks usually by the number of likes and number of comments they have. For instance, this one that was actually built by Hannes that won one of the tournaments, so you can always find strong decks on this website if you are not really into the deck building part of the game. And what else can you do here? So there is the rules page. If you have the core set, you will have the rules reference. It's a physical little booklet, and you can also find this on the Fantasy Flight Games website. It's a PDF with all the rules, but you can also use this website. It's the same document basically. As you can see, it's basically a glossary of all the rules entries sorted by in alphabetical order. And it's even a little better, I would say, because it has some of the new additions that are not in the original rules. For instance, stuff like the bestow keyword, which was introduced later, and you can also find that on the FFG website under, I think it's something like expansion rules, something like that, but it's all in one document here. So it's very useful to keep this open if you are trying to learn the game, as you will find all the rules here. And let me just show, if you scroll down to the bottom, this is the main thing that you need to study, I guess, before or during your first game. This is the timing sequence chart with all the action windows where you can do stuff. And if you go further down, there's the framework event details, which is basically explains what needs to happen in each phase, but we'll be showing you that in this tutorial video. We'll play a tutorial game with pre-made decks that are designed in a way that allow us to show some of these rules, interactions, and game mechanics as they come along. And also on this website there is the FAQ, the official one released by FFG, which has, I guess it's not that useful for this tutorial game. It's mostly advanced stuff with advanced rules, interactions, but if there is something relevant, I will quote from this as well over the course of the video. And tournament regulations, this is if you go to a tournament, there's some additional stuff about how rounds work, and games have a time limit and stuff like that, which is also not that relevant for today. And the other tab here that you can see is the restricted and banned cards. So when learning the game, this is not really something you should worry about when just playing at home with friends or family. But if you are going to play online on the website that we will show you today, you will be expected to have a legal deck, which means you will need to be compliant with this restricted list and stuff like that, which I will explain, I guess, at the end of the video when we are done with the actual game. Okay, so first of all, what needs to happen before the game starts, you need to have a deck. So as I said, this is not going to be a deck building video, but just to show you what constitutes a legal deck. So if you check the deck building entry in the rules, you will see that you need a faction card. If I click a new deck here, here is where you can choose your faction, and these are, as you can see, you have 8 in the game, the main houses from this Song of Ice and Fire world. You have Baratheon, Greyjoy, Lannister, Martell, Stark, Targaryen, Tyrell, and also you can choose the Night's Watch. And the choice of faction will be important because it limits you as to what cards you can include in that deck, and also they play very differently. They have different cards, different themes and mechanics, so you can see what suits you best. And then to create a deck on this website, you will be required, for instance, to choose one of the factions here, choosing Baratheon, and then you can choose an agenda as well. This is optional, you can choose no agenda, but there won't really be a situation where no agenda is a good choice for you. There will always be something useful you can do. And these agendas have some abilities. You can see the text here briefly. And then also some deck building restrictions, so you will be allowed to include certain cards that you normally could not, or you will be prevented from including certain cards in your deck that normally you could include in your deck. So we made some decks in advance to show this game, so I will just show you this website. Let's go full screen. So this is the Iron Throne, where you can play the game online. And
can I inject something just before we go to the Iron Throne?
Yes, of course, go ahead.
I just wanted to say I love ThronesDB. It's a great website. It's maintained by Stefan Topstedt, and a great shout out to him that he's doing that. I use it all the time. And yeah, it's really great. And you are also the ability, if you start using it as well, to give him a small contribution via PayPal to maintain the website. Yeah, I'm very happy that he's doing all this. And yeah, so I'm happy that this site exists, the same as the Iron Throne that you're going to show now. It's also an amazing website, and also shout out to the guys who are maintaining that one.
Yes, exactly. Basically, they do this for free, Stefan on ThronesDB, and then there's a couple of guys that run the Iron Throne. And as you can see here, you can contribute, and then you get this green color to your username if you do that. Yeah, so the Iron Throne is where we can play the game online, and as you can see, there is a lobby chat. This is used sometimes to promote certain tournaments or to answer rules questions quickly for new players. And of course, since this is the internet, you can see some people here are complaining and having a go at their opponents and stuff like that. We all know basically who those 3 or 4 players are that you need to keep away, but generally it's a pretty good community here. You can see who is online here if you open this, and then there are a couple of tabs. So this is your decks. You can import decks. Basically, if I click new deck, this is empty, but I can paste my list from ThronesDB. You can export it there, and it's fairly easy to do. And then once you start the game, you will be able to select your deck from all that you have available. And okay, so this is this helps you with mainly with a couple of different manual commands that you can do if something goes wrong in your game. You can correct the game state with these. You can switch these tabs during the game, and it won't exit the game. So if you are on play and then switch to help to check this, it is fine. It will allow you to do that. And you can change your profile settings as well here. So I will show you that once we are in the game. And as you can see here, these are the games that are running currently. So 8 games at the moment. Sometimes there will be more, especially if there is an online tournament happening, or sometimes during the night in Europe, I guess, is the quiet time where you might only see 1 or 2 games being played, and they're all, as you can see, this brown color, they're all casual games at the moment. You can, if I click new game, it will allow me to change the game type. This is what I was talking about. You can change it to competitive or to beginner. Let's choose beginner here, and then you can change the mode as well. So yeah, just to discuss this briefly. So these events here are some online tournaments that happen occasionally, and if you choose one of these, it will just set the settings correctly to that particular event. And then you have these 2 main modes, which are standard and Valerian. So I will explain this at the end when I talk about the restricted list and stuff like that. But if you play on this site, you will struggle to find any games that use the Valerian mode. You would be expected normally to play standard. And then you have the settings to allow spectators. You can show hands to spectators as well, and time limit, which we won't be using today. So the game rules don't actually have any time limit. It's supposed to be, it takes as long as it takes until someone wins the game. But if you read the tournament regulations, you will see that occasionally games are timed so that they can all finish around the same time, since they're played concurrently. And sometimes online people will use these time limits. 55 is the usual number to basically simulate a normal tournament game. And then there is a setting to use chess clocks, which I've never used, and probably shouldn't bother with that as a beginner. Okay, so I will now set this game to beginner, and we'll use a password just so no one joins. So Hannes, what would you like the password to be? Your choice.
Friendly open.
Friendly open, okay.
And maybe one thing we can say, at the beginning when I started, I was a bit intimidated that there are almost no beginner games open. But I would encourage everybody, you can open a beginner game on your own, so anybody who joins would know that you don't have that much experience. But also if you join a casual game, and it's no problem just to say, hey, I'm new to the game. Most people are super friendly and also super helpful, so you can also ask them questions about the game during the game, or also about the Iron Throne if you're unsure about a certain mechanic. So don't be intimidated. Many people who are playing online are playing for a long time, but that also means that they can help you out a lot.
Yeah, you can have some bad luck, I guess, if you just join random games. You can get someone who is not very helpful or doesn't really have time to or the patience to explain stuff. But and that's the sound you hear if someone joins your game. Yeah, and but you can arrange games. I will put a link in the description to our friendly open Discord server, where there is a very helpful community, and you can join that and arrange games that way with players who are usually very helpful to newcomers. Okay, so if you click select deck, you will now get that from your list of decks. I think if you scroll down, you might get some pre-made decks as well. I think the intro decks and the World Championship decks are here if you want to play with those. And let's choose this one. And once you click start, it will take you to the game. Okay. So we'll play the game. As I said, the rules reference document is basically a glossary that goes in alphabetical order, so we will discuss most of those entries, but try to do it in a more sensible way as they come up over the course of a normal game. And I will occasionally keep a tab open here and quote directly from the rules if needed, but mostly we will just try to explain in a more simple way, and then at the end of the video I guess I can go through the entire document and see if there's anything that we missed, and also do a quick summary if there is something complicated that might be difficult to understand when you read it for the first time. Okay, so as you can see, this is the game now, and so on your right there is a chat log which is automatically updated once stuff happens. As you can see, it announced my faction and agenda and my opponents as well, and then you can chat here, exchange pleasantries, or maybe even discuss the game if you like.
Or if you have a question, that would be a good way to ask. Just write something in the chat and say, okay, how can I do this or that? Then maybe the other player help you out.
Yes, exactly. And if you're doing a beginner game, don't select the option that mutes spectators. If you do by mistake, you can change it here. Yeah, they're already unmuted, as you can see. And okay, and we can check the settings here. So this is these are the action windows. As you can see, I've selected all of them, and you would be advised to do this before playing your first game. So you can disable them so that the game skips some of them and goes more quickly, I guess, but usually it's not a great idea to basically let your opponent know that you don't have any actions in specific action windows. It's just better to manually pass each time. And these two, okay, timer for card abilities and timer for events, so the game will stop if you have a way to cancel something that happens, and you can disable this if your deck doesn't have anything. You will, once you play a few games, you will know that basically some factions do not really have many options here, and the opponent will know this as well, so there is no real reason to have this selected and pass each time. And the other settings, okay, make keywords optional, so very occasionally there will be some kind of game situation where you might not want to use the keywords. If that happens, you can tick this and choose the order of keywords. This usually is disabled by default because it doesn't matter, but I will tick it here just so that the game slows down once we get to the keywords and gives us more time to explain what they do. And also prompt before using dupes to save means that the game will ask you if you want to do something that usually you will want to do almost every time, so most players won't have this enabled. But once we get to those situations, I will discuss them again. And yeah, this if you click the settings here, this will only apply to this particular game. So if you want this to be permanent, you need to change them in your profile. And let me just show you this here. The card image size is customizable, so large works best for me if I do full screen on my computer, but if they're too small, you can enlarge them further, and also you can make them smaller. And basically it's the same settings that we already saw, and you can set this time here when there is some kind of interrupt where you can stop the game with some card ability. You will get this timer, and if you are a new player, there will be an option to click I need more time. So it's not that important, but make sure this is not some ridiculously small number that expires before you can even read what the game would like you to do. Okay, so if we click play again, this is now the situation. Okay, so let's see what the rules entry for setup says. How do we set up the game? As you can see, the first one is determine game format and select DEX. So the Joust and the Melee formats are the two ways to play the game. Basically, Joust just means it's two players, one against the other, and Melee is for more players, but on this website currently you cannot play Melee, so we won't be discussing this. I guess at the end I can show you in the rules entry. It's basically just 2 or 3 things that additionally happen in Melee that don't really happen in Joust. So game format will be Joust, and decks are already selected. And then determine first player is something that is usually skipped when you play the game, because in setup both players can do their thing basically at the same time simultaneously, and you don't need to choose the order, so we won't bother with that. And then announce factions and agendas, which are already on the board here. So I'm playing House Lannister and my agenda is Filthy. As you can see, if I move my mouse onto this card, it will display, a large picture will be displayed in the top right corner, and you can read the text if you don't know it by heart. And also I can do this for my opponent, but my opponent is playing the same agenda here. And
so I'm playing Stark Filthy. Yes.
So most of the cards we've used in this tutorial are familiar names from this world of Song of Ice and Fire, and also mostly from the core set and the early cards, with some exceptions. So if you have the core set, you might come across a lot of these cards that we'll be using in this tutorial. And then create treasury. Well, this is not something you need to do on the Iron Throne. Treasury is just done manual. So if you're playing in person, in the core set there will be some gold coins provided and some power tokens. As you can see here, they're displayed here, gold and power. You just basically arrange those so that you can use them throughout the game. But this website will do it for you manually. And then also there are influence tokens in the core set, which can be used to track some card abilities. We'll see if that comes up in this game. Okay, and then you place plot decks. So let's go back to that deck building part of this tutorial. So as I said, we won't be doing that from the point of view of strategy, I guess, but just to show you what constitutes a legal deck, you need to choose your plot deck. That will be 7 plots usually. As you can see, they are already on the board here, and you can check your plots at any time. They are face down, but you can look at the plots you have, and if you can see, if I try to interact with my opponent's plots, nothing happens because they're hidden information to me. So 7 plots in your plot deck, and the rules here are you can have 2 copies of one plot, and then the other 6 need to be different plots, or the other 5 I should say, or you could just have 7 different plots. That's also an option, but some plots will have a plot deck limit of 1. If you can see this in the bottom right corner on this particular plot, it says plot deck limit 1. So this is not one of the plots that you can include 2 copies of. But this one, as you can see, doesn't have that limit, so you could have this plot twice in your plot deck, and then the others all a single copy. The draw deck is the minimum number is 60 cards, and this is a good number to aim for. Obviously you need to aim for consistency to reduce the variance in your deck. So if you have 60 cards, you will have more chance to always draw the same ones and always draw the cards that you consider to be the best in your deck. Whereas if you have something like 100 cards, for instance, if I really want to draw Tyrion Lannister, I might not be able to do that, because there will be a maximum of 3 copies in a 100 card deck then, instead of a 60 card deck. Yeah, so these restrictions can be modified a little bit by the agendas. Let me just show you. So the top line here on this filthy agenda says you cannot include more than 15 neutral cards in your deck. So when I choose a faction, in this case Lannister, I can include Lannister cards in my deck, and I can include neutral cards. Neutral cards are those that don't have any faction affiliation, so I can always include them in any deck. But this puts a restriction. I can include 15, so if I wasn't playing this agenda, I could in theory include 60 or more. Maximum number of cards, there is no limit, but the tournament regulations do say that you can you have to be able to shuffle your deck without assistance and in a reasonable time. So if you show up with 100 cards, you will probably still be able to do that, but if you show up with 300 cards, you might not. So in that case, your deck wouldn't be allowed probably, but on this website all the shuffling is done automatically by the site, so it won't matter and you won't be wasting any time with that. Okay, and the last, I think, deck building rule that you need to follow. So you can only include 3 copies of any card by title. So as you can see, we have Tyrion Lannister here. So 3 of the 60 cards I have can be Tyrion Lannister, and no more than that. So these familiar cards from the story, Tyrion, and as you can see, I have Cersei and Jaime here, have different versions with different abilities, and you can include different versions in your deck, but you are still limited by 3 cards per title. And again, since you would be usually looking for consistency, you probably want to include only one version and just have 3 cards of that version in your deck, unless there is a very good reason to do it in a different way. I'm not sure if we'll come across anything like that in this tutorial. Okay, let's see. So where have we left off? We've placed the plot decks, shuffle draw deck. So draw deck is my main deck that I draw cards from. Usually in Cardtypes it will just be referred to as deck, your deck, and if it refers to your plot deck, it will say plot deck. And then draw setup hands. So you draw 7 cards from your deck and you take them into your hand, which is this area here that is displayed. As you can see, my opponent also has 7 cards in hand, but I cannot see them, and also has these 53 cards in their deck. The deck is not open information, it's face down, so I cannot check my cards. And if I do, for instance, if I cheat and check, the log will display this message in red, basically, that I'm looking at my deck when I shouldn't really be. So I can close and shuffle, and it will say that I've stopped. So you can't really get away with anything like that.
Yeah, but it's also good to say that the Iron Throne will automate almost everything for you, but you can also do basically almost everything by hand. So you can draw cards from the draw deck, you can shuffle it by hand, and everything like that. So if you've made a mistake or something like that, you pressed on a reaction and didn't want to do it, you can usually always revoke that. I think one of the few exceptions, which is very difficult to do, is you've chosen a plot and you want to change that. But other things can usually be taken back to hand if you just draw them. I think it's useful that you can both do it manually, but most of the time you can just follow what the program does for you.
Yes, exactly, and you can check those commands that help you do stuff manually, and sometimes you can just, for instance, if I click on Tyrion, I can drag him to different game areas, for instance, and I would get that same message displayed in the log that I've done something with Tyrion that the game wasn't really allowing me to do at that point, but you can do that if you want to correct the game state, or we'll probably do that a couple of times in this game just to show some cards that really need to be shown, but we haven't drawn them or something like that, so useful tool. Yeah, and so this is where the game has basically left us now. It's asking us here if we want to keep our starting hand, and we have two options. We can keep the hand or we can mulligan, and what this means is if I choose mulligan, I will shuffle these cards back into my deck and draw 7 new ones, and then I have to keep that second hand, so only one mulligan option. And yeah, if you've played a particular deck a few times, you will usually have a pretty good feeling as to what kind of opening hand you are likely to get, so you will decide this. This is a strategic decision basically. If you're happy with what you have here, you keep it, and if you want something better, you can take the risk with the mulligan, but don't be too greedy, because you can be stuck with a hand you don't really want if you mulligan and don't get anything great.
Yes, so I like my hand. I will keep it. And with standard type of decks, I would say one thing to consider is, do you have some economy locations of characters, and do you have enough characters overall? So a hand without characters, that is usually something you would always want to mulligan. And if you don't have any economy, that's also not ideal. So these are I would say, the two standard things that you would look for. But as soon as your decks get more specialized and have very special techniques, you might also deviate from this kind of rule of thumb.
Yes, so economy location, this is an example of that. So let's just see what we have in hand to show you what kind of cards you can have. So there are 4 card types that you can have in your draw deck, and one of them is a location, and this is one, the gold road. So in the top left corner is the cost of the location. It's 2, so this is something you will need to pay to put that card into play. And then you have the title and the Lannister symbol, and this little what would you call this, a scroll of parchment, I think it's called in the rules, means that the card is loyal. So loyalty by itself doesn't do anything during the game, but there will be some deck building restrictions with most agendas that refer to loyal or non-loyal cards. So if you have the core set, fealty is one of the agendas you will have, and then there will also be banner agendas. These are on the backside of these faction cards. So House Lannister, if you flip it over, you will have an agenda called Banner of the Lion, which will have a deck building restriction. Let's see if we can. So if you type the name of the card in the chat, I think it's displayed here, as you can see, so we can have a look. So Banner of the Lion would be an agenda that says you may include non-loyal Lannister cards. As you can see, Lannister is displayed with this symbol again in card text. So you may include non-loyal Lannister cards in your deck, and then you must include at least 12 cards, 12 Lannister cards in your deck. So this is where loyalty is important, because if you play a banner agenda, for instance, you will not be able to include loyal cards from another faction, but you might be able to include non-loyal cards from that faction. And then we have below the artwork is a trait, Westeros trait. Traits again are something that by itself this Westeros trait will not do anything, but it will be referenced often in card text, so cards will interact, for instance, with Westeros locations or something like that. And then there is this limited keyword. So limited is important in setups because you are only allowed to set up one card with this keyword, and you will find it mostly on these economy locations that provide a gold boost, and very occasionally on other card types as well. And when you build your deck, you will probably want to include quite a few of these locations that help with your economy, but not so many that you are then stuck with them, because you can only place one in setup, and then when we'll get to the proper game, you will only be allowed to marshal or play one of these cards each round. And the rest of the text is basically the ability of this card, so we'll get to those abilities a little later. And then this little +1 gold at the bottom is the gold modifier that if we can see here, so the plots have this gold modifier, so when you have a plot revealed, you will be able to collect that number of gold, and then if you have this location in play, this will be boosted by 1, as you can see. Okay, and then the other card type we have here is character. Sir Jaime Lannister, as you can see, so the 6 again in the top corner is the cost, and then he has these two symbols, the red and the green one. These are the challenge icons. If I switch to this character, for instance, you will also see at the bottom the blue one. So these 3 challenge icons help the character to participate in challenges when we get to the challenges phase. And these are different on different characters. Some characters might have all 3, some might have only 1, or in very rare circumstances that you might find a card that has no icons at all, but mostly 1 or 2, sometimes 3 you will find, and you have different combinations. And the 5 below that is the strength of this character, so the higher this number is, the stronger he will be when it participates in the challenge. Again, you have the traits. Jaime Lannister is a knight and a lord, and then his ability. And just below that, I don't think you can read that from here, is basically flavor text. It's a quote from the books, and this has no effect on the game at all, so it's just there for flavor. And at the very bottom you can see the illustrator of the art, and then also the symbol of the set this card was released in, so Jaime Lannister from the core set. And since I don't have the other 2 card types, I will now mulligan this to see if we get the others as well. Okay, so as you can see, these red cards are the Lannister cards. They are considered to be in-faction cards. And then I also have this brown card. This is a neutral card that can be included in my deck as well. And this is a limited location, like that gold road that we had in the previous hand, so we are quite happy with that. And we've also drawn the other 2 card types that can be included in your deck. So this is an attachment card. It's a very similar cost in the top left corner. Then it has the condition trait, and then it has the ability and some flavor text at the bottom. And as you can see, terminal is a keyword, and then in brackets you have basically an explanation of that keyword. So if cards have a lot of space in this text box, sometimes you will see these explanations that remind you of what these keywords do. I will talk about those keywords when they come up during the game. And the last card type we have is an event. So these are slightly different. They are useless on setup because they cannot enter play. They're just played from your hand. As you can see, again, cost in the top left corner, and then you have the text box. The first line is a play restriction that will tell us when we can play this card, and then the ability, an interrupt ability, that will also be, the text will explain what this particular card can interrupt. Okay, so we now place the setup cards. So this all happens before the game properly begins. So the cards you set up here will already start in play, and the Iron Throne has set this gold value here to 8, so you don't really have any gold. You don't need to take gold from the treasury during setup, but this is just to remind us that we can place on the board 8 gold worth of stuff. So as you can see, Tywin is cost 7, so if I place him, I can then place another card with cost 1, and this seems like a good thing to do. As you can see, my opponent has placed 3 cards, which I don't know what they are because they're placed face down, and they will be revealed once I finish my setup. So if I place Tywin, as you can see, I have another Tywin in my hand. And oh, one thing I forgot to mention, so if you check to the left of the title where it says Tywin Lannister, there is a little symbol which means the character is unique. So Tywin Lannister is a unique character from the story. And then I don't have any non-unique characters, but for instance this King's Road, if you can see the title, if it were unique, there would be the same symbol below it where it says the King's Road, but there isn't that symbol, so it's a non-unique card. It's just a generic King's Road, and you can have more than one of those in play. And Tywin, I can have one in play, but if I click on him again, as you can see, it will allow me to place both of them in setup, because the other one will enter play, or will begin in play, I should say, as a duplicate. And this is an important mechanic in the game. So unique cards, if you have more than one, you can put the second one into play for no cost as a duplicate. And what this means is, let me just see. Yeah, pretty long rules entry here, so let's just simplify this. So basically, when a card would leave play, if it has a duplicate, the duplicate will allow you to save it and keep it in play. You will just discard the duplicate instead. So it's most of the time in your favor to put these duplicates into play. And in setup, they will cost you nothing. So Tywin is 7, and duplicate, you are still at 7.
So yeah, and the dupe saves from everything, right? It saves if the character would be killed, or if a card would be discarded, or also if you have to take it back to your hand. It would save against any of those, right?
Yes, so the rules say this line: a duplicate grants its controller the following triggered game ability: interrupt. When the overlapping unique card would leave play, this card is duplicate to save that card, cannot be cancelled. So if for any reason the card would leave play, we will see how cards might leave play during the game. You can discard the duplicate, and the card will stay in play. So it's there are several save effects in the game, but duplicate is the strongest because it works basically in almost all situations. Okay, and then this King's Road, the economy location. Also, as you can see, now I am on 0, so if I had any 0 cost cards, I could also place them here, but I don't have any. And when I click done, these cards will be revealed when my opponent clicks done. They will be revealed.
All right, so I have this thing. I set up a card, but now I'm dissatisfied with my choice. So I now manually drag it back to my hand and replace it by another card. The only important thing is that you still have to come up to 8 gold in total, and you cannot bypass the rule that you can only set up one limited card. Else you can do it by hand and revoke your choice. And then I also click done, and the cards are revealed.
Yeah, so the game opens this. This is the next phase. We have to select a plot, but I can minimize this and we can see what has happened. So first of all, if you play the timed game with the timer, this is the point where you would see in this part of the screen there would be usually a 55-minute timer that would then start. It would start at 55 and go towards 0, like basically without interruptions, like in a football game. And I can check what my opponent did. So there is a character, Caitlin Stark, on the board, and location with that gold modifier, and also another location here. So cost 4, and then 2 locations with cost 2 for 8 gold worth of stuff. And the next thing that happens, so we had 7 cards in our opening hand. I placed 3, and then I can replenish my opening hand, which means I draw up to 7 again. So I draw 3 cards, and yeah, this is the goal of the setup. Basically, is to set up as many cards as possible. So a lot of decks will be satisfied with something like 4 cards. I would say that is probably the average, but depending on what your deck is like, you might get a bigger or a smaller number on average with your setups. And obviously, if you can set up 5 or even 6 cards, you will get more cards back in hand. You will be up to 7, and basically this is something you want to do. Unless the other thing you need to consider, I guess, in setup, some decks will desperately want one particular card that helps whatever their game plan is with that deck, and they might mulligan just to hopefully draw that card, and that will be more important than other considerations. Okay, so that concludes the setup, and now we proceed to the plots. And as you can see,
I think maybe we can still mention this, Miha, is that, for example, on my Northern Armory, there's a +1 gold icon. So that means I do get the gold bonus, but it's not a limited location. So while almost all limited locations either have a gold bonus or can have an action where you can reduce costs, there are also some locations that grant gold bonuses, and they do not count as a limited location, so you can set them up in addition to a limited location.
Yes, exactly. So most of these will be limited, and the cards you come across, if you only have the core set and the cards that were released earlier in the game, most cards that provide economy bonus will be limited, but you will find some of these that are not, and this particular card, Northern Armory, is very popular in Stark decks, and very useful for setups as well. If you had a limited card, you would get a bigger bonus, as Hannes said. So as you can see, Hannes has selected the plot. It's marked in the chat log as well as the graphically here on the screen. And I have these 7 plots to select from, and we'll see what a plot card looks like. So it's the same size as a draw card, but it's as you can see, it's turned around. It's placed how would you say it, basically horizontally as opposed to vertically, and we have art on top, and then the title, A Game of Thrones, and then you have these three numbers. So 4 is the gold value. What this means is once you collect that gold, you will get exactly what this number says, plus any modifiers you might have. As you can see, I have Tywin Lannister, who has that gold modifier, +2, so I would collect, if I revealed Game of Thrones, for instance, I would collect 4 and then 2 more for Tywin. And plots also have traits. It has the scheme trait, and then it has an ability, and that plot deck limit that I've already mentioned, and at the bottom right corner is the reserve value. This is something that will be relevant at the very end of the round, so we'll discuss that when we come to it. Okay, so what you're looking for, I guess, in the first round is to have a decent gold value so that you can put more stuff on the board. And this is, I should also say, this is the only point in the game just after setup where there won't be any revealed plot. So I will reveal a plot now, and then for the rest of the game there will always be one revealed plot. So when I reveal the next one, it will replace the one I reveal here. And we'll choose this one, so a noble cause. And my opponent has revealed the same one, which is nice because I can show you what the second little number here in the brown diamond means. So it's 0 on both plots, and this is the initiative value. So what happens is when you come to the plot phase, when you reveal the plots, you compare this number, and then whoever has the highest number wins initiative, and that player decides who the first player will be in that particular round. And what this means is whenever something happens, for instance, if you come to the action window, the first player has the first opportunity to take an action in that window. Or when you come to, there are two phases where the first player will get to do their stuff first. So the marshaling phase, the first player will get to marshal their cards first, and then the challenges phase is where the first player will get to do their challenges first. And this is a strategy decision. Basically, it's not clear whether going first or second is favorable. It depends on your deck and it depends on the situation, but I will go first here because it will help me explain those phases. But let me just tell you why I won initiative here. So as you can see, we both have 0, but I have this card, the King's Road, that has an initiative modifier on the bottom, +1. So it's not actually 0 against 0 here. It's 1 for me, so I want this. But if I didn't have the King's Road, it would be tied, and then what happens is the player who is behind on power, as you can see, this is the power counter here. It's 0-0 because we only just started. The player who is behind would then win initiative, but if this value was tied as well, then it would be determined randomly. And so if you're playing in person, you can just flip a coin, and if you're playing on this side, it will do it for you. It will be displayed in the log. We'll just say, for instance, that one player has randomly won the coin flip and won initiative. So I will select myself to go first. If you're wondering, so the third number, the blue-gray, I guess gray number, is the claim value, and this is something that will be relevant when we get to the challenges phase. So we are not now in the plot phase. We've revealed the plots. So some plots will have, for instance, let me see, this plot close call will have a when revealed ability. So when we revealed those plots just now after comparing initiative and choosing first player, these abilities would also resolve, but since there aren't any, that part is just skipped, and we come straight to the action window. So this is the first action window in the game, and if we have something to do, we can do it here. And I guess this would be a good time to discuss what some of these abilities can do. So first of all, there are constant abilities. As you can see on Caitlin Stark, it simply says while Caitlin Stark is participating in a challenge, your opponents cannot trigger card abilities. So this is something that will always be in effect. Okay, it refers to a specific point in the game, so when she's participating in a challenge. So when that is happening, this will automatically be in effect, and you don't need to do anything to trigger this ability. It will just always be active.
What is a triggered ability? Yeah.
Yes, so a triggered ability, as you can see, let me just show you. The rules refer to triggered ability as any ability with a boldface precursor followed by a colon and the rest of the abilities. So if we check Tyrion Lannister, so first of all, the first line says that this is a keyword ability. We will discuss those a little later. We've already seen one, the limited keyword on locations. And so it says reaction. Reaction is a triggered ability, which means it will not happen automatically. You will need to trigger it when a particular thing happens that this reaction reacts to. You will have the opportunity to trigger that reaction. And then I have another one here that has a reaction ability. And do we have any? We don't have any interrupt abilities. We have one here. So treachery is an interrupt, which is another type. And then these will also sometimes be forced reactions or forced interrupts, which means they are not optional for the player to trigger. They will automatically have to trigger, and both players will need to pay attention to make sure all of those are triggered. And then there will also...
I recognize them that they're printed in fat and then have a double score. They're basically saying, okay, something like marshaling action, so they can have different names, but every time when there's this printed in fat, it's a triggered reaction or action, right?
Yes, so interrupts and reactions react to something specific, or react or interrupt something specific that happens in the game. But here we also have an action on Northern Armory, so this is something that can be triggered in the action window. This is the point we are at now. So as you can see, Northern Armory says kneel Northern Armory to choose and stand a Stark character. So this is something you can do in the action window. And then Gates of Winterfell, for instance, will say challenges and action. You can do something in the challenges phase action windows. And my King's Road here will say marshaling action, which means I can only do it in the marshaling phase action windows. And since I read that line on Northern Armory, so kneeling and standing stuff is something that happens in this game. So as you can see, all of these cards are currently standing. They are in this position, and if I click on Tywin, for instance, he will be placed on his side, which means he is kneeling. As you can see, I've knelt Tywin Lannister, and it's displayed in red because this is not something I should do without something instructing me to do it. So you cannot just choose to do this. And so kneeling and standing is something that will be relevant for characters. For instance, in the challenges phase, you will need to kneel characters to have them participate in challenges usually. And also, as you can see, Northern Armory kneels so that you can stand a Stark character. So if it is already kneeling, you will not be able to use that ability. Okay, so usually when you get to the plot phase, there will be nothing to do in this action window, so this is just rushed through. I'm just discussing it in detail here because it's the first window where we actually can do stuff, but there will be nothing, and as you can see we have no gold in your gold pool at this point in the game, and often abilities will require you to pay gold, and it's possible to gain gold in this phase of the game, but it's quite unlikely, so you might just skip this. And if I click pass, okay, so I'm first player, so I have the first option to do something here, and if I click pass, the opportunity then goes to my opponent. As you can see, it says waiting for opponent, and what happens is if Hannes now passes, this action window will close and we will proceed with the rest of the game. But if Hannes does something here, then the action window comes back to me, even though I already passed. Since the action window didn't close, I would then have another opportunity to do something if I had something available.
I have nothing to do, so I'll pass and we'll go on to the draw phase.
Okay, so displayed in the log, as you can see, we've already drawn 2 cards. This happens automatically, and it's the first thing that happens in the draw phase before you get to the action window. So you take the 2 cards from the top of your draw deck and add them to your hand. This is all done simultaneously, so I get these 2, and as you can see, my opponent also now has 9 cards in hand, and the Hound here is one of those cards that has a forced reaction, as you can see. So when this happens, whatever the Hound is reacting to, you will be forced to trigger. So we'll have a look later at what exactly this is. And again, if you have actions in the draw phase, you can do them here, but since there isn't any gold, this is another action window where it's unlikely that anything would happen, but it can happen, so you will come across cards that do trigger in this particular window. So we will pass again, and my opponent passes as well. Okay, and now we've come to the marshalling phase. So this is one of the 2 phases that take a little longer during the round. And as first player, what happens is I now become the active player. And I collect 7 gold, so there is 5 gold on my plot. The gold value is 5, and then I have 2 from Tywin, which gives me 7, so I take those 7 gold coins from the treasury and add them to my gold pool. As you can see, my opponent has not collected income at this point, so I am the active player and I start first. It is possible for my opponent to gain gold, I guess, with card abilities, but currently he cannot do that. And it is now my opportunity to marshal cards. So the actions work in a similar way to the other phases. So I have one action and then Hannes has the next action, but only I can marshal cards from my hand, which I will show you in a moment. So Hannes will be able to marshal his cards when he becomes the active player after I am done. If I click done now, as you can see, he will become the active player, so definitely I don't want to do that. Yeah, so one important thing that happens on the Iron Throne, and you need to know about it, is it will not have Hannes pass each time after my actions. Since he has no gold and I am marshalling cards, it will just let me do that without interruption, because it's unlikely that he would have anything to disrupt this sequence. So if you play in person, you might do it the same way. The opponent will just wait until you are done, but if the opponent has any actions, they can let you know. For instance, in the chat, they can tell you that they might have actions, and then you need to wait and give them a chance. The site will not force the opponent to pass each time in the marshalling phase action window. Okay, and now I can put stuff on the board. So let's see. I have 7 gold. However, I have this constant ability on my plot card that says reduce the cost of the first lord or lady character you marshal this round by 2. And this is one instance where those traits are important. For instance, Sir Jaime Lannister has the lord trait, so if I marshal Sir Jaime Lannister now, I will reduce the cost by 2, and he costs 6, so it will only cost me 4 to marshal Sir Jaime Lannister. And then I have another card that helps me. This is the King's Road, so marshalling action. I can use this now. I can kneel and sacrifice the King's Road. We'll talk about sacrifice in a moment. To reduce the cost of the next character, you marshal this phase by 3. So if I marshal Sir Jaime Lannister and I use the King's Road, that will reduce his cost by 3 and by 2 from noble cost, so he will actually be reduced to 1, and I will pay 1 and still have 6 left in my gold pool. So what does this mean, kneel and sacrifice? So when you sacrifice a card, it's one way that cards can leave the board. So as you can see, the King's Road is now in play, and it will remain in play until something drives it out. And one way for it to leave play is by its own ability. If a card is sacrificed, it will be placed, I will just use it now to demonstrate. Boom. It will be placed in your discard pile. And let's have a look at this rule entry. So if the game has you choose and sacrifice a card, you will have to pick something that fits those requirements. But in this case, the cost of the King's Road will just basically choose it for you, so there won't be any choice to be made. The King's Road will be sacrificed to use its ability. So one thing that is important here is this wording: kneel and sacrifice the King's Road to do something. So card abilities are worded often in this manner, where there is a cost to their ability that precedes the word to, and then what comes after is the effect of the ability. And if you want to do this particular effect, you need to pay the cost in full. So you need to kneel and sacrifice the King's Road, which means if the King's Road was knelt for some reason, you couldn't pay that cost, and you couldn't use this ability. And so I've now placed it in my discard pile. This is the area here, so this is open information. Hannes can see this as well, and as you can see, his discard pile is currently empty. This is the first card to enter the discard pile. And now the next character I marshal this phase will be reduced by 3, so I need to do the calculation as to which characters I want to play. So if I play Tyrion Lannister, he will cost me 5, and then he's reduced by 3 and by 2 since he is a lord, and I can play him costing 0, as you can see.
Maybe one thing I can add to Miha is like on the sacrifice and on paying costs. I think one thing for me that was important to understand is that costs can never be saved. So we talked about dupes, saving basically in almost all situations, but both paying costs and sacrifice are exceptions to that rule. So if you have to sacrifice a card, even if it has a dupe, that cannot save it. Is that correct? And also that I could not basically save a character from being killed if being killed is the cost. Is that correct?
Yes, so this is one instance where actually reading this rules document on ThronesDB will be helpful, as opposed to reading the one you get in your core set, because I think this was updated in the official FAQ. It says that if a card leaves play as part of a cost of initiating an ability, that card cannot be saved. So if it had a duplicate, you could not use it to save that card. So in that case, if the king's road is not unique, so it cannot have a duplicate, but let's just imagine if it did, the duplicate is just discarded if the card leaves play, so both would end up in the discard pile. And one other thing to remember, so if you sacrifice the king's road, that is not the same as discarding the king's road from play, so there will be some cards that react to specifically to cards being sacrificed or cards being discarded, and you need to remember that these two are different. And also that sacrifice is, as Hannes says, is one of the, I think it's the only way a card leaves play that by default cannot be saved, so you cannot save a card that is about to be sacrificed in any way. And okay, so I'm left with 7 gold. So one thing that is important here, so what happens with this gold after I'm done with my marshalling? It will remain in my gold pool, and most decks will not be able to use that much gold after the marshalling phase, but Lannister in particular has some ways of spending this gold, so if I have gold left over into the challenges phase and the following phases, I might be able to do something with it, so it might be an option for me to just leave some of the gold in my gold pool, but 7 is too much, I won't be able to spend 7, so let's marshal this location. Casterly Rock says you may initiate an additional intrigue challenge during challenger's phase, so we'll see what that does when we come to it. And I think we'll end here and leave the other cards in hand, and I'll show you what I can do with those cards in the challenger's phase. So when I click done, Hannes will become the active player, and he will be able to marshal his cards.
Right, so I'm also using the reduction I get from my plot to marshal Brand Start. It's also a lot. So usually it would cost 2, minus the 2 reduction, it's 0. And then I also add a King's Road as one of my locations. But I decide that I don't want to use this round. I don't have to use it, even if I could. I want to save it, so next round I get a larger reduction. And instead, I will marshal a Begging Brother. And the Begging Brother has the bestow keyword. And in parentheses, you see a number. So when such a card enters play, I can choose to place up to 3 gold from my gold pool on the Begging Brother. And later on, I can use this gold with his interrupt. I only have 2 golds left in my gold pool, so I cannot bestow him with 3 gold. But I choose to put 2 golds on him. So you see the symbol on the Begging Brother. And the way I can use it is basically that it says when the effects of a triggered character ability would initiate, discard 1 gold from the Begging Brother to cancel those effects. And I think we will see in the challenges rounds how I can make use of the Begging Brother. Then I have no more gold left. And I'll click done, and we'll proceed to the challenges phase.